Jiuling, Afterthoughts, number 1. A lone swan rises from the sea. It dares not look toward its old pond, but sees instead a pair of kingfishers nesting in a protective tree. High up in those precious branches, are they free from fear of arrows? Vivid plumage draws attention, and with it, perhaps, some evil end. Now I must fly to a distant world, beyond the reach of hunters' arrows. So as I've said before in previous videos, this is the first poem of the book. The first block of poems is 5-word old-style poems, what is usually called gushi. Gushi poems have 5 words per line, 5 characters. They have a more flexible rhyme scheme and a metrical system than the typical Tang poets, which would be the liu shi, the regulated poem. In this case, even verses in the original version would rhyme. Even lines, sorry. So what does this poem tell us? As I said again before, I think we can read it in 2 different ways. There's the literal reading, and in the literal reading we have a picture of nature. So we have a swan that was alone by itself. It starts flying and it sees a pair of kingfishers in a nest in a big tree. And we can imagine that the swan thinks that they might be in danger because of their beautiful feathers. As for the swan itself, it decides that it has to fly far, far away to a place where arrows cannot reach it. Now again, this would be the superficial meaning, and it has some very nice images. But we have to look at a second level of interpretation. Now, Zhang Jiuling was one of the top 5 scholar bureaucrats of his time in China. But around the year 736, he had a dispute with the prime minister Li Limfu, and as usually happened to people who lost court disputes in classical China, he was exiled. He was sent as governor to a remote province, in his case to what is modern Hubei, I think, north of the Yangtze River, in what for the Tang dynasty would have been the south, the relatively remote south. Incidentally, not far away from Zhang Jiuling's original birthplace, which was even further away to the south in today's Guangdong. So in this poem, the poet can very clearly be seen, perhaps, behind the facade of the natural symbols. The lonely swan is the poet himself, who goes into exile. The pair of kingfishers. Kingfishers have very beautiful feathers, blue and red, which were used for decoration, for clothing, for jewelry in imperial China. Now, those kingfishers nested in a protective tree could very well be the courtiers at court, the protective tree, the emperor. But they're not free from the fear of arrows, just as Zhang Jiuling wasn't. So he decides to take his exile with enthusiasm in a certain way, saying we shouldn't depend on something that is ephemeral and unstable, like imperial patronage. We should try to strive to go for that distant world, the world of the hermit, the world of the Taoist sage, who lives detached from the material world, its threats and its advantages. The topic, therefore, is, the real topic behind this poem is the virtue of renouncing the world. We might say it sounds a little bit hypocritical because Zhang Jiuling writes these poems when he is forcibly exiled to the south. It's not like it's a voluntary choice. In fact, in the Chinese literary tradition, in China there are 2 big philosophical and religious schools from ancient times, Taoism and Confucianism. Confucianism, which is what Zhang Jiuling would have mostly espoused, is a doctrine that insists on behaving virtuously, on working for the community, on improving yourself first, but then your family, your neighbors, your state, the whole world. It's a hierarchical and meritocratic system. And for a Confucian, it's obligatory to serve in office if possible, to make the world a better place. Now, the Taoists have a very different view of the world. Their discourse, as exemplified in the Lao Tzu or the Chuang Tzu, defends that human concerns, human society, human success, aspirations are meaningless or worthless. That the real way, the real Tao, is the way of nature, and the laws of nature are completely different, in fact, indifferent to human social interests. So if one wants to live longer and to discover the true way, the truth, one has to abandon worldly pursuits and become a hermit living in a mountain dedicated to meditation and Taoistic practices, including paradoxical thought processes. Now, China was a syncretic society, so its intellectuals mixed Taoist beliefs with Confucian beliefs, later with Buddhist beliefs. And sometimes they use them a bit, we would say, cynically. So here we would say Zhang Jiuling was a Confucian while in power, and now that he is out of power, now he espouses a Taoist ethic. But whether he is sincere or not, it's a nice poem. It's a nice poem with a nice message. Yeah? Imagistically, it has some beautiful animals and some powerful images, like the swan flying, looking at, not daring to look at its old pond when it was young, the kingfishers. It's a very visual poem. It's very easy to paint, and I quite like it. I quite enjoyed it. Well, that's all for today. We will continue next day with another of the Afterthoughts. Zhang Jiuling wrote at least 4, which are included in the 300 Tang Poems. See you tomorrow.